I started college in the fall of 2008, at the height of Barack Obama's first presidential campaign. As an 18-year-old finishing up high school and getting ready to embark on my next chapter, I have to admit I was far more concerned with graduation and moving into my new prison cell-sized dorm room with a stranger than I was the presidential race. But in a desperate attempt to make new friends, I decided to tag along with my new friend Ray to a Students for Barack Obama meeting. We spent the first meeting divvying up into working groups and discussing strategy, and I could feel the energy in the room. This was our opportunity as young people to be heard. It felt like we were an essential part of this movement for hope and change. I caught the campaign bug and dove in headfirst, phone banking, registering people to vote, attending my first campaign rallies. I still get goosebumps thinking about it. For the first time, I felt engaged, inspired, and most importantly, asked to take on this active political role. After this electoral youthquake, many of my peers faded away from electoral politics, but I stayed involved, spending the next 4 years working to get my peers engaged in elections from the municipal to the national level. I annoyed a lot of friends by pestering them to volunteer and vote, and ate way too much late-night campaign pizza. For a long time, I've credited my civic agency to being swept up in the Obama campaign fervor. But as I've reflected, I've come to realize it was really a combination of moments and influences over my life that helped create my civic identity. For one, I wouldn't have stayed involved beyond the Obama campaign were it not for adults in the political community who asked me to take on greater responsibility, like becoming chair of my local neighborhood election precinct. It was the outdoor club I joined as a kid that taught me how to work in a team, and my math teacher who threw out a full day's lesson plan so the class could put me on mock trial for my alleged crime of being late to class. It definitely has something to do with my 8th grade U.S. history class, where we debated controversial topics like same-sex marriage and the Iraq War. And it certainly didn't hurt that I grew up in a house divided with a Democratic voting mom and a Republican dad who openly and heatedly discussed the issues. As an update, my mom won the overall debate and my dad did cross the aisle sometime circa the Bush years. I'm really lucky to have had access to these kinds of opportunities that helped me to realize my own political agency and the skills and knowledge to act on it. But not everyone does. And perhaps more concerningly, often the people with the most to lose in our society are the ones with the least access to opportunities to help prepare them to engage in our democracy in a meaningful way. Civic knowledge, civic skills, and civic attitudes aren't innate. They must be learned. And yet our current infrastructure for civic learning is failing us at a time when a renewed civic spirit is badly needed. Democracies across the globe are facing threats demonstrated by waning trust in democratic institutions and the media, increasing populism and polarization, and worsening inequality, all exacerbated further by the COVID-19 pandemic. We are seeing how a culture of increasing individualism has led to a disregard for the collective interest at just the moment when a global pandemic has called on us to show solidarity with one another. Fear and uncertainty have sowed the ground for anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and the inequities of our society based on racial discrimination have become all the more clear. Civic learning is an important tool we can use to strengthen our overall civic culture, fortify our democracy, and promote more equitable democratic participation. Now, what exactly do I mean by civic learning? It's so much more than just knowing how a bill becomes a law or preparing young people to be voters. It also seeks to build citizens who can think critically and participate in democratic processes, communicate with people who have different perspectives, people who uphold values of tolerance, human rights, solidarity, and social responsibility. So in other words, piece of cake, right? Not so much. We need structural change in how we address civic learning in the U.S. From a funding perspective, we know that only $5 million was allotted to civic education by the federal government in the last fiscal year. This compared to the over $3.2 billion afforded to STEM education. Instead, the funding that does exist for civic learning largely comes from private philanthropy, making competition for resources an impediment to collaboration in the field and limiting opportunities for less established organizations to find funding for their ideas. The funding space also largely focuses on civic education in schools, neglecting other opportunities for civic learning. Imagine with me for a moment. In addition to personal leave time, you're allotted 5 days a year for an educational leave and decide to use it for a cycling tour of sites of historical and political relevance as part of a seminar with a local education organization. Or perhaps your teenager has the opportunity to spend a week at an international youth exchange focused on increasing intercultural awareness and global citizenship. In the military, you can bet civic education will be part of your training. And so-called respect coaches are introduced all over the country to address issues like racism and religious discrimination in partnership with schools. I bet you've already guessed I'm not just making all this up. Ding, ding, ding! Venture on over with me to Germany, where I'm filming this from my COVID-19-induced home office in Berlin. I've spent the last year learning from the German system for civic education, which demonstrates its unique value for civics through extensive public funding and a vast array of actors devoted to the cause, from non-formal education centers and youth organizations, to migrant associations and religious groups, even political party foundations and labor unions. The right to civic youth education is even legally codified by the federal government's social code. Certainly, Germany's 20th century history has much to do with this respect for the role of civic learning, with a visceral understanding that democracy and a respect for human rights can't be taken for granted. It requires ongoing work and investment in a strong infrastructure. A variety of permanent public institutions, like the Federal Agency for Civic Education, exist, and the state funds 6 different professional associations that coordinate the non-formal civic education field, lobby for interest, and facilitate training and exchange. In addition to these longer-term investments, a variety of government ministries promote innovation through competitive project funding, like the €115 million Live Democracy program, which aims to promote democracy and diversity through projects related to civic education, media competence, and civic engagement. This kind of funding approach ensures stability, while also promoting innovation and the democratization of the funding space, making it easier for a variety of civil society actors to access funds. But this isn't just about the money. These investments also recognize the importance of civic learning beyond the classroom. Most often, when talking with people from the United States, I'm told that civics education immediately reminds them of their high school civics or government course. And it's true that schools certainly have an important role to play. But formal education cannot and should not take on the responsibility of developing informed and engaged civic actors alone. Non-formal education, also known by some as community education, offers voluntary, structured programs that occur outside of formal educational institutions. My host institute here in Germany is an umbrella organization for over 100 non-formal education centers throughout the country. Special sites of learning where young and old people can step out of their daily environments to explore political and human rights topics in a non-formal setting, many with their own facilities for overnight stays. That's right, no grades, no mandatory attendance, no defined curricula. These key principles of non-formal learning emphasize participation and self-guided learning, practicing exactly the skills they intend to foster. In creating a space outside of our everyday school, work, and home lives, participants are able to more deeply reflect on complex topics. And whereas formal educators may veer away from controversial conversations, these out-of-school venues create the space to practice this essential democratic skill. And these places of learning don't necessarily have to be in a closed seminar room with a projector. I've seen how soccer stadiums, sites of historical remembrance, and even escape rooms have been used to approach civics in novel ways. There are so many already existing opportunities for non-formal civic learning. Community organizations and libraries, museums and sports teams, media organizations, youth clubs, the theater, you get it. These players deserve the support to make civic education an explicit element of their missions. The German system also recognizes that the cutoff for learning doesn't happen at age 18 or 22 or really ever. A strong culture of lifelong learning ensures people have the opportunity to continue to engage and learn. And in a rapidly evolving political, social, and information environment, it is crucial that we continue to practice our civic skills and learn over the course of our lives. I don't say all this to suggest that Germany has no room for improvement or that we need to follow their example to the T. nor to disregard the important work already happening across the U.S. There are really exciting ideas like citizens' academies at the municipal level, or educational policies that are beginning to include a focus on experiential civics education in partnership with community-based organizations. But there is a lot we can learn from Germany's infrastructural investments to better recognize, support, and expand these efforts. So what are 4 concrete things we in the US and other democracies across the world can learn from the German model as we reimagine our civic learning infrastructures? First, we need simply to invest more in civic learning at the federal level. Funding streams should balance long-term institutional investments and proven ideas, and also promote innovation through competitive project grants. Second, we need a public body to coordinate a cross-governmental and cross-sectoral approach to civic learning, providing resources, setting collective objectives, and coordinating efforts. Third, we all need to broaden our conception of what civic learning is and where it takes place, so that we can aptly channel resources to support new actors and initiatives, both inside and outside the classroom. Lastly, we need to understand that civic learning is a lifelong effort and build the systems to support that. The world we live in is evolving all the time, and our capacity for civic learning needs to keep up. A changing environment in terms of media and information, digitalization, and how we evoke political change demands different approaches. So I want to challenge you to think through your own experiences. What people, places, opportunities have shaped your civic identity? I guarantee you it doesn't boil down to your civics or government course. It turns out there is no magic moment or cocktail of success for fostering a civically engaged public. So why do we expect a single high school civics course to do the job? Instead, intentional civic learning can happen all around us, and for everyone, when we invest in the infrastructure to support it. Let's reimagine together all that civic learning can be.